Prior to the global financial crisis, things were going broadly well for disabled people in Britain. We had the Disability Discrimination Act in 1995. That was strengthened by the Labour government in 2005, creating a disability equality duty on all public authorities to promote disability equality. 2009, we ratified the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So really important to state that. We were one of the early ratifiers. We had the Equality Act in 2010. We had the Care Act in 2014, which said that local authorities have to place well-being at the center of what they do. They have to include carers. They have to get away from the lottery, the postcode lottery. However, there has been predicted a 4.3 billion gap in funding for the Care Act. So what we have is a series of acts which say good things, unarguable things, that are not funded because of austerity. The Labour government of 1997 to 2010, very much supportive of disability rights, but started introducing restrictions, particularly in the disability pension. The coalition government of 2010 to 2015, very much trying to cut the British government deficit on the backs of disabled people and their families. And now, 2015 government has said it's an end to austerity, the economy is doing better. That is the case, but not for disabled people. There is a third wave of austerity cuts, which are really affecting people. So in 2012, the Disability Rights Movement, the hardest hit coalition, talked about disabled people experiencing a drop in income of £500 million since the budget of 2010. So for average households at that stage, those cuts were from between £200 to £2,000 for a household that year. So huge cuts to incomes. We know that disabled people have higher costs and lower incomes on average. One of the things that the government did in 2010 was to change how welfare benefits were uprated. And this is a statistical change, moving from the retail price index to the consumer price index. I'm not an economist, I can't tell you the difference between these, except that the consumer price index is much lower measure of inflation. So every year, the upgrading of welfare benefits is at the lower of the two optional rates, and therefore disabled people fall behind year on year as benefits are automatically uprated. And just as Nicholas was saying, the rhetoric about this has been about fraud. Now, levels of fraud, for example, on the disability pension are 0.3%. Very, very low. Most errors are overpayment by the authorities, not fraud by the claimants. And there has been a pattern of negative messages in the media and by government stigmatizing disabled people, arguing that they are distinguishing between the fraudulent disabled people and the real disabled people. They are targeting on greatest need, is the rhetoric by which people are justifying these cuts. So the UK, I'm going to talk in four areas. First of all, pensions for those not working. And this is the incapacity benefit or employment support allowance. And the numbers claiming this have risen. 1.25 million in the late 1970s, rising to 2.8 million by the turn of the millennium. Now, why is this? This is not because more people are claiming because they are getting indolent or losing the work ethic. It's because the economy has changed, and the work opportunities for people who are disabled or sick have diminished. So it's far harder to get re-employed or to get employed in the first place. The pathways to work policy, the work policies of the government, were largely ineffectual. They failed to get people into work. So in 2006, the Labour government said they were going to tackle what they called a passive system of incapacity benefit by introducing employment and support allowance, ESA. They wanted to reduce the number of claimants to the pension by 1 million within a decade. So how did they do this? First, the work capability assessment, which really is a very tight, difficult assessment which disabled people have to undergo. Not with their own doctor, thought to be too sympathetic, but with doctors employed by the Department of Work and Pensions. Everybody claiming the former benefit had to be retested. And it's not about whether they can get a job, it's about whether in theory they could do any work at all. And if they are found capable of doing any work at all, which is basically everybody, they are not considered entitled to the pension. So they're not saying you have a condition, therefore you need the pension. They're saying, what is your functioning? And if we can show your functioning is, you know, you could do an office job or whatever, you don't get the benefit. So in the first phase, 2008-2010, over 60% of claimants of this benefit were found capable of work. So pushing people saying you're capable of work. There's been sustained criticism, there's been appeals, 50% of appeals are upheld. That is a staggering level of appeals being upheld. The effect of the work capability assessment has been misery. So, Barr et al. 2015 say that for every 10,000 people reassessed, there were an additional 6 suicides, there were 2,700 cases of reported mental health problems, and the prescribing of an additional 7,000 antidepressant items. So that what they've done is compared different districts of the country in terms of how many people were reassessed for this benefit and shown a direct, well, not, it's a correlation, not causation. You can't prove that these people are committing suicide or becoming mentally ill because of the reassessment, but there's a strong association. So there's this expectation that most of those on employment support assistance will be fit to return to work. So they put in a group called Work-Related Activity Component, RAG. So they have to be taking part in training courses, applying for jobs, going to interviews. In the quarter to May 2015, just 1% of people in this RAG group, the people who are seen as being capable of working, actually left the benefit. So very, very low numbers, actually. It's not working to get people into work. And so what they've, in addition to being put in this group where you're pushed into work, they have sanctions. So if you do not apply for jobs, if you do not turn up to interviews, if you do not cooperate, your benefits are docked. So there's, again, no evidence, the National Audit Office 2016, no evidence that sanctions worked, no measurement of what their effect was. And they were very different from one job centre in one part of the country to another. A report this year found that disabled people were between 26% and 53% more likely to be sanctioned than claimants who are not disabled. Job centre staff failed to take account of their disabilities. And there's been 1 million sanctions against disabled people. And sanctions is you don't receive your benefits at all for 5 weeks, 10 weeks, or whatever. It's a punishment. So for the fourth thing is the support group for people who are not expected to return to work and who are exempt from work-related activities. So that's the fourth change. So many people with disabilities who are on this benefit are not able to comply with these rigorous requirements. They're not able to go to work interviews on time. They're not able to search online or apply for enough jobs. You have to apply for, say, like 5 jobs before you see the person again. The jobs have to be suitable for you. People are going to interviews which they're manifestly not suited for, and there's no funding to go to these interviews. So it's a real, they're having to basically pay to be entitled to receive a benefit that should be theirs as of right. And the employment rate for disabled people in Britain is twice, the unemployment rate is twice that of non-disabled people. 48% of disabled people employed, 81% of everybody else. And when you look at why people are not employed, 2/3 of people out of work are limited in the type or amount of work they can do. Yeah? 1/3 of people in work are limited in the type and amount of work they can do, but 2/3 of people out of work. So they're not working because of their illnesses or impairments. There's a work program which is meant to get people into work. There has been cuts. So between 2012 and 2015, 300,000 people were offered help. In the next phase, between 2017 and 2020, only 160,000 people will be offered help. So there's been a reduction in funding for the work programme by 80%. So only 1 in 8 of disabled people who might want this help to get into work will receive it. So what we've got is no carrots, but major, massive sticks, yeah? And not successful. So that's employment support allowance. The second one is disability living allowance, which is meant to meet the extra costs of disability. And it's for everybody. It's a universal benefit. It's meant to compensate people for the difficulties of having an impairment. And they've changed it from disability living allowance to personal independence payments. In that process, they're trying to get 500,000 people off the benefit. And for example, the mobility aspect of this allowance enables people to have a car, and tens of thousands of disabled and sick people have had to return their mobility car, losing their mobility, and in some cases not able to do work because they relied on the car to get to work. So it's counterproductive. Only 45% of new claims are successful. And the transfer rate from disability living allowance onto personal independence payment, only 69% of people are successful. So they're really trying to restrict it. They're trying to save £2 billion by making this shift. This is their explicit target, to save this money. And in all of these shifts of welfare benefits, it's not about the need of the individual. It's about the requirement to save money. So they've been operating a quota, an illegal quota, to get people off the benefits. Not listening to their needs, but saying, we want to save this much money, and we're going to boot you off the benefit. So there are more of these benefit changes. Universal credit is bringing together 8 different benefits into one, and it's meant to be simple, but they've abolished severe disability premium, which meant £28 a week for people who are profoundly impaired, which will penalise 450,000 disabled people. So £28 a week is not very much, but if you're on a low income, it's a lot, and 450,000 people lose that. Access to work, to try and get people into work, to pay for sign language interpreters and personal assistants in work. Again, people are finding there are limitations. Deaf people particularly are really losing out. So that's the context. Austerity is, I was asking Simo for the wonderful Finnish vittu swear word. Austerity is vittu, that's the word, it's vittu austerity. So you want me to talk about though, personal assistance. So this was established in 1988 with the Independent Living Fund. And the Independent Living Fund was a national fund to meet the support costs through personal assistance of disabled people. Because at that stage, the government could not give money directly to disabled people. And the Independent Living Fund was a charity set up to do that. And people they really liked the Independent Living Fund. It understood them. It assessed them appropriately. And they found that it was centralized so that there was a consistency. So that was good. The Independent Living Fund was abolished in 2015. It was felt to be unfair and not treating people right, and so it was abolished. And so the move was to local authorities to fund independent living. And this came with the 1996 Community Care Direct Payments Act. Now we know that living in the community is cheaper than being institutionalized. On 2012 figures, the average cost that was claimed in personal assistance was £204 a week. So that's about £10,000 a year for this average cost of personal assistance. But if you're institutionalized, if you're in a local authority care home, and small changes can mean that it's unsafe for you to live in your home, you're not getting the costs met, you're not looking after yourself, you're not capable of living independently, the cost of a place in a local authority care home is £32,000 a year. So you move from maybe £10,000 a year that helps you be independent to £32,000 a year the cost of dependency in a care home, often with people who are not your people, like with older people or whatever, wonderful people, but they're not where a younger disabled person should be. So the restrictions in direct payments, the shift from the Independent Living Fund to local authorities in principle sounds okay, and it's consistent. But it was that money that was shifted was only ring-fenced for the initial period. And when you're a local authority and you're having to judge all of these different needs and demands on your shrinking budget, that personal assistance looks generous and it looks unfair. And so you raid that pot to meet your other statutory or other obligations. And remember, local authorities in Britain have been cut over the last period by 31%. So they're losing a third of their budget and they need to pay for their statutory obligations. So they're passing costs on to disabled people. They're cutting self-advocacy schemes for people with intellectual disability. They're cutting transport. They're cutting other services. They're charging people for the meals on wheels, the meals that come to them every day for lunch. They're charging people more for that. So many, many new charges and less eligibility. So the Care Act was great. Remember, it talks about well-being, but the bar, which meant that you were eligible under the Care Act, has been placed at the highest possible level. So it wipes out a lot of people who are using personal assistance to support literally independent living and participation in society. That's gone. Personal assistance now is for survival. Get up in the morning, make your sandwich lunch, shower, bath, put you to bed. The minimum. Many people are subsisting on the minimum. The number of people who are employing their own support staff, the percentage has decreased. So it's gone down. 49% of people in 2008 were employing their own care staff. It's gone down to about 28% of people employing their own care staff. Social workers have made the choice, which people have by law, to have direct payments, independent living, and employ personal assistance. They've made that difficult and unwelcome and said, oh, you don't want to go down that route. Even though disabled people's organizations exist to help people with payroll, with recruitment. So it should be, it is, people like it, it empowers them, we know it works, but local authorities have made it more and more difficult and whatever the word is, unwelcoming route. So fewer people have taken that route. They are subsisting on what local authorities want to give them, which is often not much. Because crucially, the payments to the infrastructure organizations, to disabled people's organizations, like the one I'm a trustee of, Equal Lives in East Anglia, has been cut. Because in order to exercise your Article 19 right to independent living, you need to know what that is. You need to know your rights. And you need a disabled people's organization to support you to claim those rights and to help you with the payroll and all the rest of it. You can't, it's very difficult to do it on your own. That's all been cut. Our organization is going to the wall. So, I told you how many, 65,000 disabled people in England employing 145,000 personal assistants. But actually 65,000 disabled people is not very many. So for example, I'm looking at my statistics, 470,000 people receive home care. So far fewer people receive direct payments for independent living. The number of people receiving personal budget, self-directed support, is 647,000. So that's a huge number. Only 10% of those are actually employing their own personal assistants. So we are losing that argument. We are losing that battle. Personal assistance is being seen as an expensive option for, I don't know, very empowered people. So I'm just going to wind up now. These changes to the incomes of disabled people, to the availability of independent living, are not the only ones. Inclusive education has been undermined. There's a huge crisis in special educational needs provision in England at the moment. There's thousands of children not in school because the local authority or the school will not fund their special educational needs. So they're literally staying home. I told you about cuts to People First and advocacy organizations, supporting employment and travel subsidies. So the effect on all this is an increase in anxiety and suffering for disabled people. This is the era of personalisation. So we're talking about individuals and their budgets, individuals and their care packages, individuals and their education and health packages. And because they're not groups, they're individuals, they're easier to cut, and the change is invisible unless people bond together and fight for a better solution. The government knows that pensioners vote, and that pensioners vote for the right. And so pensions have a triple lock. They will always increase by the maximum possible, whereas benefits for working age disabled people and children are not increasing at the same level. So it's true to say in Britain that disabled people have borne the brunt of cuts to social care and are basically underpinning the austerity provisions that are achieving, trying to balance the budget. It's interesting that they're often using the rhetoric of the social model of disability. The cuts to employment and the cuts to disability living allowance is saying, look, we've removed all the barriers. It's the barriers that make you disabled. Why aren't you working? It's not about having an impairment, it's about being disabled by society. But we've removed the barriers. Or it's about saying, you have a wheelchair, therefore you're just like everybody else, because you have a level access and you can participate. Why aren't you working? You don't have independence needs because you're already independent. So they're using this rhetoric. I told you about the scrounger rhetoric, articles focusing on disability benefit and fraud in the newspapers doubled from 2.8% in 2004-05 to 6.1% in 2010-11. So they did a content analysis and found there's more than twice as many articles talking about scroungers and fraud and you're not really disabled. 13% of households with disabled members say they face great difficulty in making ends meet. That's twice the rate of households without disabled people. Disabled people are twice as likely to live in poverty. So to conclude, this is a government which ratified the CRPD back in the day in 2009, has completely ignored and violated the principles of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It does not uphold Article 19 that dear Ranveig explored for you so well. It violates progressive realization. Under the Convention, you have to progressively make things better. We can't expect it all to be done at once. What you cannot do is make things worse, and that's what the government did. And the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities that Ranveig mentioned came and did an assessment of the British situation. And they said, they published a report, and you can find it online, criticizing the government for violating the rights of persons with disabilities. And the government said, we do not agree, and have completely ignored it. And that report, that investigation, has had zero impact on British politics. Thank you.